Sound matters. Be heard. Welcome to the podcast where you get exclusive behind-the-scenes tips to make your own show sound truly spectacular. This is Podtastic Audio.
Hey, what's happening, everybody? How are you doing today? Thank you so much for listening. I am Chris of the world famous and now world traveled Chris and Christine Show podcast. You can find us on the old interweb at chrisandchristineshow.com. And it's so good to be back in the captain's chair, back home. Yes, I was traveling. Yes, I was gone. And I just flew back into town earlier in the week. Actually, last week as you actually hear this. So last week we took everybody to Miami, Florida. And then we drove up north from Miami up to Orlando area to go to Disney World for the entire week we were there from San Diego, because we're here in San Diego, California. And we flew all the way over there. We were gone the entire, I think 7 or 8 days we were gone. A couple of days in Miami, and then the rest of it was up in Disney World, where we got to see everything. I'm talking every single theme park we were there. We went to all 4 of them. Plus, we did other things too. We were there, and we got to ride every major attraction that they have at all the parks. We pretty much did, which is pretty awesome to be able to do all that in a single week. And it was a fantastic vacation. It was great. Now we are back home and we got to get resettled and everything back up and running again and back to podcasting. Now, speaking of going on vacation and podcasting, if you followed our social media at all, you may have noticed that, yes, Christine did contract COVID-19 while we were out on vacation. As of right now, I tested negative and I feel fine. So, which is kind of weird because we're both living together. We're both together all the time. And yet she has it and I didn't get it. And it's just kind of weird. But yeah, so right now she's not feeling too well. So I do not know when we're going to be up to doing our regular podcast over there. It's whenever she's feeling better. But for right now, I feel fine. So I feel great. So today on Podtastic Audio, we're going to discuss one of podcasters' greatest mysteries of all, and that is, why would anybody press play on your podcast episode? Well, I'm assuming you have a podcast, but if you do not have a podcast, don't even worry about it. It's not that hard to do. You just get up and just do it. If you need help, I'm here to help you. No big deal. But why would anybody press play on your podcast episode? Now, would you even press play on your podcast episode? We'll get more into that later. So before we figure out why people actually want to press play on your podcast, let's look into an article I found from Wave. It's spelled WAVVE. It is wave.co, and they did an article on 7 podcaster habits that really annoy their listeners. Now, you really don't want to piss your listeners off, but if you wanted to, if you're creating a podcast to specifically piss off your listeners, here are things that podcasters do that kind of annoy their listeners, your audience. You don't want to piss people off. It's always hard to get listeners in the first place. And once you have them, you really don't want to piss them off. But these are things people do. We all kind of do this, but it's some of the things that really kind of annoy people when they listen to a podcast. Now, starting off, they say, the first one they have here is, it says reusing old content. Now, I've said before, you can always reuse old content if you're going to be going on vacation like we were, or if you're going to be sick or something like that. You can easily take one of your back episodes that you really enjoy, and you're like, oh, this is a really popular episode. Create a little front end part that says something very simple like, hey, I'm not here right now. I'm out for whatever reason. Please enjoy one of our more popular episodes from our back catalog. And you just splice and dice, put it all together in your editing, and you send it out. But you got to let everybody know, hey, this is a reused episode from a previous episode we did. So if you're a current listener, you've already heard it, you may want to skip this episode, whatever. Please enjoy. It's something very simple you put on there. So they say it really annoys people if they listen to old content. The next thing they say here is that really pisses people off is obviously too many advertisements. Now, unless you're getting paid a lot of money, and if you are, the funny thing about advertising you have to realize is that on a podcast, it's not live television or live radio where you have to physically sit through it. On a podcast, dude, you can just totally like skip that. There's a skip button on every podcast player, 30-second skip or whatever it is. Or you can do the fast forward thing. Even YouTube has that. See, YouTube got smart and they put it in their algorithm to where the advertisement has to play before you can continue watching your video. It's a little different when you do it inserted yourself into your own show. So too many that's obvious, Okay, another one they say is similar hosts or lack of individuality. So what does that mean? Basically, it means like if you have two hosts on your show, like you and your friend are doing the same exact show with the same exact content, and both of you agree 100% of the time on every single thing that's said. Yes, I like that too. I thought that movie was great. Well, I thought that movie was great too. And there's no actual difference between the two of you. Then one of you needs to go. I'm sorry to say, you can't all be exactly the same on the same show. It's almost like the same mind sharing the same voice, different voices, same mind going back and forth. You don't have to be exactly the same. If you have a difference, that's why with Chris and Christine, it's always been like a male and a female, because that's pretty different. You can hear the difference between a male and a female voice. They sound different. We got different opinions. We got different views. We got different upbringings. It's very different. So we both kind of share that dynamic. And then we bring a guest in. It's even a third layer of difference. And we try to not really argue that much. But yeah, so here's another one they have. They say constant housekeeping. And what they mean by that is basically saying all the basic chit chat that's what's going on in your lives, your house. That's basically what our entire podcast is all about, is constant housekeeping. We bring in a guest, so on and so forth. It kind of annoys the listeners if you're constantly talking about what your dog did this week, or your routine, or what's going on, or today, or this and that, or whatever. It kind of annoys the listeners. Now, it depends on why you listen to your podcast. If they're coming to listen straight to the content, if you're telling them tips on how to make $1 billion doing whatever, then they're probably going to try to skip to that part and not so much listen to what your cat did this week. So I can see that point of it all. It all depends what kind of show you do. And for the record, your show is your show. You do it however you want to do it. Okay, the next thing they say here is, not being relatable to new listeners. Really? Well, I guess what they mean by that is when you're growing your podcast, you also want to have people, you obviously want your listeners that always listen each week. You still want them there every single week too. You want to keep them around, but you also do not want to shy away from new potential listeners. Like you don't want to have like inside jokes or talk about things that a listener would need to listen to every episode to really understand. You have to think about every single episode. When someone pushes play on your podcast, they're going to listen to the most recent one. And there are new listeners coming to your show every day. And they're not going to go back and listen to your last 100 episodes or whatever it is. They're going to listen to the most recent one. That's going to be their starting place. So you want to make sure that every episode, you kind of want to explain what you do on your show, who your show is for, what it's about, very briefly who you are. So basically, when someone jumps in, they don't need to get caught up on the last 100 episodes. They can be right where they're at. Okay. This one I have a problem with. The next one they say is unorganized and rambling thoughts. Yeah, I do that quite a bit, but I think you can, if you really want to, take all of that out in editing. If you want to spend a lot of time editing, you can cut out all your rambles and all of your whatever. What I do on this show to kind of keep me on track is I don't really use a lot of show notes. I mean, you can do a lot of show prep, bullet points, whatever. You do your show how you want to do it. I just kind of go with things at the top of my head. And then if I realize I'm rambling too much, what I will do is I will stop the recording, go back here in Audacity as I record this, and cut out the last 10 seconds or so and restart over again. In fact, as you hear me talking right now, I've already had to do that 3 times since we've been recording. So, yeah, I mean, they say it really pisses off the listeners, the rambling thoughts. Okay, here is another one they say. They say acting rude towards your guests. Now, who would do that? Like, hey, Joe, thanks for being on our show today. You're a real jerk. Yeah, I mean, nobody really does that, but I can see where sometimes podcasters will try to pry and get really interesting conversations happening that the guest really is not prepared for. They're like, yeah, I know you went to prison, and I know we're not really supposed to talk about that, but I'm going to drop a little curveball into the conversation and say, hey, what was it like in prison? And the guest's like, wait a second, we want to talk about that. It kind of can really put them off. So try to be very kind and respectful towards your guest. Your guest did give you their time to be on your show today. They are giving, you, and I know some guests actually will charge the host to be on their show, and just vice versa. There'd be some hosts that will charge the guest to be on their show. So I've never paid for a guest, and I've heard of it happening, but I've never exchanged money to have a guest on my show or vice versa. Although I did have one guest, only one in the history of guests we've done, that has actually asked for our podcast stats. Now, I know that if you're pitching like a bigger show or a bigger name, they may want to see your download stats to kind of see what the audience size is that they're going to be talking to in front of, or making it worth their while to even come on your show. Because if you have an audience of 5, a big name author or something may not even want to bother coming onto your show to, audience of 5. But you don't have to tell them. I said it only happened one time where someone has ever asked us for our stats. And I told them, and I thought they were fairly impressive at the time. I thought they were decent. And after I told them the number, they totally rejected the interview. They said, no, thanks. They didn't even say why. They said, no, thanks. Just like that. And I was kind of hurt by it. It was kind of pissed me off, but it is what it is. That's basically all they have so far on this list of things that really can piss off your listeners when you do your podcast. So I will put this article, link to this in the show notes for today's episode, so you can browse it and look at it all you want. So I've already posted this on social media, but like I said, I'll put this into the show notes so you'll have it and you can look at it and all that stuff. So try not to piss off your listeners as best you can. Now, how do you even get listeners in the first place? If you're starting out, the old wise thinking used to be was that if you just build it, they will come. Yeah, build a podcast. The audience will just come to you. They'll just gravitate towards you. If you have a podcast out there, you don't have to do anything else. Just make it and put it out there on Apple Podcasts or whatever. And then all of a sudden you'll get all these listeners coming straight to you. I'm sorry to say, it's not that easy. And if you have a podcast right now and you're struggling just to get listeners, it's not that easy. Just putting a podcast out there, it's not automatically going to come to you. So what makes somebody press play on your podcast? Now, as I was getting on the airplane in Miami to fly back home to San Diego, before they tell you, put your phone on airplane mode, you can't really use any text messaging or any kind of social media stuff. I had this great idea. I was kind of thinking what would make somebody press play on a podcast? What would make you, as a listener, what makes you press play on a podcast? So I put up a survey, and basically the survey said as this. It said, I gave 4 choices. So the choices are type of content, type of host or host, type of sound design, or I just put all of the above, which is basically a cop-out, pretty much everything makes me want to click on host. I need a little bit of everything to click on this episode. So for the first time ever, I kind of had a tie. Not really, but I did. So the 2 that tied were the 2 you probably think about would be coming in at 39% of the vote was type of content. And also 39% of the vote came in with all of the above. So, and only surprisingly at 1%, they clicked on type of sound design. So if you think about it, the content is the reason why people push play in the first place. What is your show about? Is it going to help that person solve whatever problem it could be? The problem could be pure boredom, or maybe they want to learn about something, or maybe they just saw this recent movie. Say they just saw whatever movie's in the theater right now that's very popular. I don't know. So they just saw that movie. And they're like, oh, I love that movie. I want to hear more about that movie. I want to get other people's opinion about that movie. So they may look at podcasts that have that movie in the title, and they'll press play for that particular episode. So But if the podcaster doing that episode, if their audio is god awful and completely sounds like garbage, you can't understand it, or they're rambling a lot, or they're not getting to the point, or if they're talking about for 10, 20 minutes about their cat and what their cat did this week, they potentially will probably leave and not listen to the episode if they're coming to that show for that one purpose. That's the reason why they press play on a podcast episode. Now, what keeps people staying around, it's got to be the total package. It's got to be the host, the entertainment value, it's got to be the sound quality, and it's got to be the content each and every week. I think the trifecta is what keeps people pushing play and subscribing, because pushing play once is all fine and dandy, but you really want people to stick around and subscribe and come back every single week. You want to keep new listeners coming in, but you also want to keep the current listeners still there and listening each and every week or whenever you publish your episodes. So it kind of surprised me a little bit when only like 1% got the actual vote for sound design. Now, I know there's a lot of shows out there that use sound design to really tell their story with a lot of sound effects and a lot of music and sweeping sounds and different levels of the audio. I mean, those can take a very long time to produce. We're talking weeks, if not even a month, to produce just one episode with all the different elements and different things. For me, always try to make sure our episodes can be sounding great, but not like over the top great. There's a difference. There's a different level between like we got it done, we make everybody sound good, but it's not like this overproduced, sweeping like production, like radio show. And mainly because we're too busy. I didn't got time to do that. And I want to get things out as quick as I possibly can. And for us, it's always been podcasting for me. It's always been like from a radio background where everything's very natural. Everything happens organically. Nothing's scripted. Nothing's written down. It's like a live conversation we're having in the same room, all hanging out, talking. And that's all really an interview really is it's a conversation that you want to listen to, like eavesdrop on the conversation. That's what a really good interview is. And I was telling some of our guests we've had recently, we had a couple before we went on vacation, that one, she like rambled nonstop and we couldn't cut in. It was very hard. She was not used to having conversations. She was used to doing straight up like TED Talks or speeches or being on stage presenting. That's her thing. So you try to interview somebody like that, it's hard to really cut in and ask questions and interject. We like to have conversations. We don't like to have interviews. I think I'm telling our new interview guests we have on, I'm going to start telling them this, that we don't have interviews. We only have conversations. It's very dynamic. It's very organic. And we all talk. You can interject me. I can interject you. It's like a normal conversation you'd have on the phone. It's not a TED Talk. It's not a speech that's been prepared. You're not on stage giving a speech to everybody. So those kind of interviews really bore me. And it's hard to really have a good dynamic with somebody when they're really like that. Hey, speaking of audio and audio quality, I see a lot of podcasters on social media. They will show pictures of their new toy or new equipment they just bought. Like I just bought a new Rodecaster Pro 2, and I just bought the brand new SM7B microphone and all the gadgets and gear. I dropped $2,000 on stuff. Look at me. My podcast is now going to be awesome because I spent $2,000 on equipment. It's now all of a sudden it's going to be great. And I'm sorry to tell you this. The gear does not make somebody press play on a podcast. Like if I didn't tell you that I'm talking to a pod mic going into a Behringer interface directly into my iMac, does it make a difference? Probably not. In fact, the last episode I did, please check it out. It's been amazing. The last episode was all about me creating a podcast with minimal equipment in every room of the house, live in one take. I used the Zoom PodTrack P4, which you can get for about $200, $220, and I used a Audio-Technica ATR21 microphone, plugged right into the thing, running completely on batteries, and I walked around the entire house and the entire property, talking to you in different rooms and what it sounds like, using that whole entire setup. The entire setup cost was probably $350 total, maybe, because the microphone's about $350, I guess, maybe, for everything, including the headphones. And I get the podcast done. You can do everything, and the cool thing is you do not need to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to create a podcast. And your listeners, they come to you for your content and your energy and your enthusiasm and you creating a decent show. You do not need thousands of dollars of stuff to do that. That's what I'm saying. The listeners don't even know that you have thousands of dollars worth of stuff. They don't know. And the chances are they really don't even care. So basically, if you cannot pull off a very successful podcast with simple, basic equipment, there's no chance in hell you're going to pull it off and make it better with thousands of dollars worth of equipment. The more money you spend on equipment, it's not going to bring in the listeners. It's just not. It's going to make you feel more comfortable doing a show because maybe you sound better, or maybe it's just easier to push buttons on the Rodecaster versus trying to edit everything in post. But even then, if you're trying to do a live show with a Rodecaster and you're pushing, say, sound effects and different jingles live in real time, thinking you'll save time in the editing, you can fumble over that stuff too. Push the wrong button or have the fader down instead of up or have the mute on the wrong one. There's a learning curve to all of that stuff. Just like there's a learning curve with doing a regular show. Like even if it's just you and a basic microphone, like plugged into a computer, straight up USB. Now that you know that it's not the tech that causes people to press play on a podcast episode, it's actually the content and structure of the show and all of the above really is what it is that causes people to stick around and press play. Don't waste your money on stuff. So with your simple USB microphone, or even a microphone setup like I've got, or like the Zoom Pod Track, or something very simple, you can create a fantastic show and nobody will know the difference on how well it sounds. I'm here to help you create a decent show with very simple gear, probably gear that you're already using right now. And I try to find the easy ways to get stuff done. Like this podcast is hosted on Anchor. Anchor is completely free. And if I didn't tell you this right now, you would never know because I don't advertise with Anchor. I don't put the stupid little Anchor logo all over my podcast page. I don't do any of that stuff. I just use them for their free hosting. Thank you very much, Anchor. But that is one tip out of many to create a decent sounding podcast or any kind of good podcast you can create without having to break the bank. So I want to thank you once again for joining me here on Podtastic Audio. You know, if you have a podcast or you've been thinking about doing a podcast, don't you even worry about it. You can do it with basic, simple stuff. And if you want to be a guest here on Podtastic Audio, I'm always looking for new people to talk to who have podcasts. Tell me about your podcasting journey, what you like about podcasting. If you have any questions about podcasting, maybe we can learn from each other. Stuff that I don't know or stuff you don't know. We can have a conversation, not so much interview, but a conversation about your podcast and podcasting. You always can hit me up at podtasticaudio@gmail.com. Of course, the link for that will be in the show notes. I put all links to everything in the show notes. You know why? Because people forget things you talk about in the actual podcast itself. So if you put things in the show notes, they easily just go down there and click. And that's what show notes really are for. It's just to put links to things that you talked about in the episode. You know, but you can do your show however you want to do your show. And until next time, you keep on making your fantastic audio with your fantastic podcast, and I'll catch you later.